we in Australia are the world leaders in managing herbicide-resistant weeds. We were the world leaders in creating them to start with, but now we truly are the world leaders in managing resistant weeds, and today is all about that. It's about that practical management. So thank you all for turning up, and looking forward to, some of you we're spending 3 days with, some of you just today, but yeah, looking forward to a good couple of days. So my topic is double knock. Before I get to that, I just want a little bit of housekeeping for the speakers. This little microphone here, we're going to put on you. Jess at the back is filming the presentations, and Jess is going to use this to capture the audio. So we'll clip that on you, and this is just your normal clicker for forward and back. But my presentation is the double knock. So the big six is these 6 tools. We're going to talk about them all day, and number one of the big 6 is the double knock and the double knockdown technique. So the double knock, everything in the world of managing resistant weeds is all about double knocks, isn't it? If you've given a hit of something, how can you get another hit on that to follow up? How can you stop the survivors of that first herbicide or first treatment that you've put on? Everything in managing resistant weeds is about double knocks. My presentation this morning is just about that double knockdown, so killing those glyphosate, I guess, glyphosate resistant survivors. Glyphosate is such a big deal that it gets its own practice. So we're going to talk a little bit about glyphosate resistance, we're going to talk a bit about the risk of paraquat resistance, and we're going to talk about why glyphosate is such a big deal that it gets its own practice. Those guys coming in, make sure you come in, there's no problem. I can't see you anyway, these lights are just completely blinding me. But come in and grab a seat, there's plenty over this side as well. All right, so let's talk about the double knock. I don't think that's my presentation, Evie. You need to switch it to the next one. There we go. Thanks, Evie. There we go in there. Righto. Right. We're on song. So, glyphosate resistance. This is a little bit of data from Peter Butzala, so there's a temptation to go and hide out of the lights. And we're going to hear a bit more from John Broster in a moment about glyphosate resistance. We've talked to you about glyphosate resistance for years, haven't we? It's been this slow train coming, this glyphosate resistance train. Well, when we're in the US, we heard how bad it was. It is a nightmare over there. They switched from using 19 herbicides to using 1 and just throwing out all other weed control in favour of glyphosate. Now, we haven't done that in Australia. We've been a bit more diverse, but glyphosate resistance is coming, and it's really, you can blame anyone. You can blame the guys that sprayed on the fence lines. You can blame the council. You can blame the fallow guys. You can blame the guys growing Roundup Ready crops. Or really, you can just blame anyone that sprays glyphosate on ryegrass. Now, ryegrass is the world champion of herbicide resistance, and it is the one that's going to develop glyphosate resistance first, and that's why we talk so much about ryegrass. And so just that bit of data, Peter Butzala, I thought there was an animation coming up there, but that's on the next one. But this is showing the percent of paddocks with glyphosate resistance in a range of regions. So this is South Australia and the Mallee. We've got a range of herbicides there, but this is the percent of paddocks with glyphosate resistance. Now, fortunately, it's at fairly low levels, right? And John's going to talk about this a bit later, so I won't steal all your thunder, John, but this is the New South Wales data. Glyphosate resistance, it's there, but it's still at low levels if we do a random survey. Western Australia, Michelle Owen does the RE resistance surveys. 2010, glyphosate resistance was at about 7 or 8% of paddocks. She's just completed 2015. It's about the same. So the glyphosate resistance train is coming, but it's coming slowly. And we feel in WA that we're stemming the tide with double knocks and so on, and all of the other integrated weed management that we're doing. So if we have a look at the market for glyphosate and paraquat, if we really are dinkum about stopping glyphosate resistance, it should be about 50-50, shouldn't it? Well, this is just it's not hard data, but this is just from me calling resellers in Geraldton, where I'm based in Western Australia. and having a look at what percentage of glyphosate and paraquat they sell. So back in 2000, it was about 93% glyphosate, 7% paraquat. I'll put someone on the spot here in a minute. 2015, it had moved a bit, about 85% glyphosate, 15% of the market's paraquat. Paraquat got cheaper. What is it here? Tim? 70-30. 70-30. Anyone else from the chemical business? 60-40, that much? It really has changed, yeah. And price has obviously been a driver, but also all of the advice.
In the knockdown pre-sow market.
Knockdown pre-sow market, yeah, which we have to be fair, that's what we're talking about here.
Grown a lot of other places as well.
Yeah.
But in that market, 60-40, 70-30.
Excellent. All right, so you guys are probably in front of us. I don't reckon we'd use 60-40 glyphosate paraquat in WA, despite how much we talk about it. Righto, so what makes a good double knock? I'm going to show you a bit of the research on the double knock, and I guess I want to tell you that there's two ways to beat glyphosate resistance in ryegrass, right? Now, one is the double knock, and the other is all of the other stuff we're talking about today to smash that seed bank, and I'll tell you a story at the end of a grower who has done that. So resistance isn't a problem if there's no weeds, is there? And ryegrass is the world champion, and ryegrass is the one that's going to develop or evolve glyphosate resistance. But anyway, let's start by having a look at the double knock research, okay? So this is some computer modelling that was done in about the year 2000 by Paul Neve and Art Diggle in Western Australia. So Paul Neve was with ARI at the time, Art Diggle, Department of Ag, and they modelled that if you use glyphosate every year, in about 15 years, your probability of evolving glyphosate resistance will start taking off at around that year 15. And they're about right. That is just about where we are at now, 15 years after they did this study. Right, you don't have to be a Rhodes Scholar to work out that if you use glyphosate every year, you get glyphosate resistance. And then they also modelled if you use the double knockdown technique, glyphosate followed by paraquat or spray seed, then you don't get resistance. So great stuff. So getting on to some of the double knock research, this is trials that I did when I was with the Department of Ag and Food. So I worked with them as a researcher and extension person for 13 years before joining ARI and leading the communication team at ARI 5 years ago nearly. This is the timing between knocks. So at the time, the conventional wisdom was glyphosate first, followed by spray seed, 5 to 7 days apart. And we really were just flying by the seat of our pants. We didn't know how close you could go, how far you could go. So we did some trials, and this is the surviving ryegrass for glyphosate followed by spray seed. 1 hour, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days between knocks. Now you've got to remember, looks like there's quite a few survivors there, but the nil, the unsprayed, had 623 ryegrass per square metre. So these are all sort of 97% control. So what it shows is, didn't matter what your timing between knocks was. You could even go as close as an hour. But this is susceptible ryegrass. So the glyphosate was probably killing them all anyway, but what it showed was the spray seed didn't switch off the glyphosate, if you know what I mean. But we had enough spray seed there to kill the ryegrass. So timing between knocks, we really started recommending, okay, you could go as close as 1 day, 2 days is better. But that 1, 2 days to 5 days or a week is the ideal timing between knocks. And then we had a look at sequence. Do we have to use glyphosate first, or could we use spray seed or paraquat first, followed by glyphosate? And this is the ryegrass data here, and look at that. Spray seed first, followed by glyphosate, that's what you've just seen. But, yeah, sorry, no, that's what you've just seen. Spray seed followed by glyphosate works, as does glyphosate followed by spray seed. So it didn't matter which way you went. Sounds a bit wrong, doesn't it? Well, it is wrong, because if we look at the capeweed data, wherever we use spray seed first, followed by glyphosate, it didn't work. So you burn off that broadleaf weed, and then you can't get any glyphosate into it. So the double knot research sort of told us that it's got to be glyphosate first, followed by spray seed or paraquat in the sequence. Then this story came along. So this is from Chris Preston and Peter Boutsalis and others at Adelaide Uni. And they did some pot trials with glyphosate-resistant ryegrass. So you've got to remember the first ones I've just shown you are susceptible ryegrass. this is glyphosate-resistant ryegrass and the timing between knocks. And so we've got 3 populations. VLR1 is this very susceptible population, and then 2 glyphosate-resistant populations. And what they found was that they've used glyphosate first, followed by Paraquat at a marginal rate of Paraquat. When you know, for 1, 3, 5 days between knocks, everything's sweet. But when we get out to this 7, 10 days between knocks, we start to see some survivors to Paraquat. So that's a bit of, so they sort of came out with a strong message that, okay, if you're going to use a double knock and you've got glyphosate-resistant ryegrass, you really need to go early. Go that sort of 2 to 5 days between knocks. Okay, but the but with this research is that is at a marginal Paraquat rate. A higher Paraquat rate, it all dies. But if your Paraquat rate is a bit so-so, then there is a bit of a time when the glyphosate is applied to the glyphosate-resistant plant, it stresses it, and then it doesn't want to die from Paraquat. I can't remember the exact rate, but I think it was around the litre field rate. Yeah.
What level of resistance to glyphosate?
I don't know the answer to that. The question was what level of glyphosate resistance. I don't know the full answer to that, I'm sorry. Yeah. I know there's a couple of different mechanisms going on there though. So there's a range of glyphosate resistance mechanisms and yeah. And then Paul Neve also had a pot trial, same thing, 3 populations, so VLR1, NLR70 and another one. And this is the survival. And the same thing, at that sort of 3 to 7 days between knocks, there was a problem for one of the populations. There's some survivors. Whereas going a couple of weeks apart or going really close, it worked well. And then the field research. This field research was done a long time ago. Andrew Story with Tony Cook, Frank Taylor and Paul Moylan. So they did some double knock trials in the field in the Liverpool Plains where they keep that Paraquat rate going up as that interval goes out. They keep managing to kill the ryegrass. So how are we going? Any more questions about the double knock research? Yeah, so can you just use Paraquat straight at 2.5 litres? And yeah, essentially. But I mean, you will see that you are getting half of the control. You know, this particular population, it was 50% control with glyphosate, so the glyphosate was helping. And it will depend on the mechanism. Some glyphosate resistance mechanisms are really strong and others are a bit weaker. So you can sort of weaken the plant with glyphosate and then finish it off. But you've got to sort of assume you've got one of the strong mechanisms and you need the full hit of Paraquat. But so it gets a bit further to the question is, can we just rotate between glyphosate and Paraquat? I think I've got a slide on that coming up. Oh, let's just hold off on that question for a moment. So there's the double knock textbook. I think this is where we're at the moment. It's the glyphosate followed by a Paraquat or a spray seed sort of a thing. And I think that 2 to 5 days sort of satisfies everybody. It satisfies the old research that I did, it satisfies the Chris Preston research where they found a bit of a problem at 7 days between knocks. And this is ideal world. But you know, if you're a little bit wider than 5 days between knocks, then all well and good as long as that Paraquat rate is high. That if you're looking for your ideal world, you spray your glyphosate, you give it at least a couple of days to translocate into the plants that are susceptible, and then finish it off with a big rate of Paraquat. And really we want a couple of leaves plus on our ryegrass because if they've just that one leaf, you can just burn the top off them and they can survive. What do you think? Any questions about that?
You got any work on pretty canal?
Yeah, so double Paraquat or, yep. So I don't have the slides here, but yeah, there's been plenty of it and it's really good. It does work and yeah, it is a very successful technique and like you say, they're using it in front of Roundup Ready canolas. I actually had a trial once where I had wild radish this big and we were saying, all right, you're backed into a corner, it's the end of seeding, you're trying to quickly get on the paddock, can you kill it with Paraquat? And yeah, 2 spray seeds actually in that trial, a couple of litres, then a couple of litres. It was big, but it killed massive radish that you couldn't kill with one application. So yeah, 2 Paraquats. All of this research has got 2 Paraquats in it and it does always work. Yep. I've got a feeling that in that particular trial, the ryegrass was that dense and it was getting a bit big by the time they sprayed it, that coverage became the issue. But you're dead right. And with research, like we rarely see that 100% control. 97 to 98 is common. But your point is exactly right. And that is going to lead to where I'm heading next, is that it's not just about just knockdowns. It's about the whole package and smashing that whole seed bank. Because you're right, that's what they did in the US, essentially. They just kept achieving about that for about 10 years, and then they had the world's biggest herbicide glyphosate resistance problem. Andrew Story's trial was a fallow spray. I'm not sure if it was quite spring, but it was sort of late winter. But yeah, it applies, I think, at any time of the year. Fallow sprays, I mean, I think you find with fallow sprays, people do tend to stretch out that interval between the knocks a little bit because, you get those few germinations just after you've put on your first fallow spray. But yeah, it does apply to all different situations. But just the same rule applies. It's just got to be that lethal rate of paraquat. So with a fallow spray, if you've got ryegrass that deep, it's very hard to have a lethal rate of paraquat, isn't it? So the fallow spray has got to be applied to ryegrass that big. Yeah. Well, thanks for all your questions. That's great. And that's what today's all about, is to just keep those questions coming. But I'm just about out of time, so I'm going to keep rolling along. So, and here's the problem, is that paraquat resistance is a real thing as well. So this is a photo from Andrew Story. He and his wife Sally, who's also a weed scientist, that's what they talk about after dinner every night, found some ryegrass in a vineyard which is glyphosate and paraquat resistant. And they got that by rotating from one to the other. So some years glyphosate, some years paraquat. They didn't like using glyphosate too much because they felt that in certain circumstances they got some root uptake from the vines. That may or may not be true, but for whatever reason they would just rotate sometimes. Sometimes glyphosate, sometimes paraquat. And they ended up with resistance to both glyphosate and paraquat. Right, and it's in a vineyard, but it just shows that it's possible, right? So if we just rotate between them and that's all we do, we could cause big problems. And so a little bit more to that, we sort of dug out all of the known populations of paraquat resistance. So Roberto Buzzi created one in the lab that was just 4-fold resistant to paraquat. Chris Preston had a couple from that pasture seed industry in Naracoorte, 32-fold resistant to paraquat, 4-fold resistance to glyphosate, 3-fold, 8-fold. And then there's one from a vineyard in South Africa, Andy Cairns, who's a weed scientist over there, 32-fold resistance to paraquat, 14-fold resistance to glyphosate. Now, talking to Chris Preston about these, what he felt happened was that they sort of evolved paraquat resistance on this side of the paddock, glyphosate resistance on this side of the paddock, and then they cross-pollinated. So, don't like the scare tactics, but it really just goes to show that paraquat resistance is a real thing too, and we could break paraquat as well if we just think, right, we'll just break glyphosate, then we'll switch to paraquat. Having said that, just using paraquat, rotating to paraquat is still a good idea. Now, there's certain seasons come along, I don't know if this was one of them here, where you get a real true break. Is that sort of how it happened here? Or, yeah, you got a really good break around Anzac Day. Is that right?
Rain in March, another one, 25th.
So rain in March and then Anzac Day. And so the March one, you'd already killed everything, so you had bare paddocks. Come the next rain, is that true? Or?
Yeah, there's been a shot of April rain too.
Yeah, but on that April rain, if you found yourself with just 2-leaf ryegrass and you're going seeding, and you've just got very small weeds, that's the day to go, right, I've got to give glyphosate a rest here, let's just pull out the paraquat and just go straight paraquat. Is that a reasonable suggestion? Yeah. So it is all right to just rotate to paraquat and give glyphosate a break, but obviously the double knock is ideal. And so then, and I'm just winding up here, as I said at the beginning, glyphosate resistance in ryegrass is the world champion, right? It's going to be the one that can evolve glyphosate resistance first. Yes, there are other weeds, but ryegrass is the one that evolved glyphosate resistance everywhere. So the good thing about ryegrass is we can beat the seed bank. So there's the double knock to hold back glyphosate resistance. But then the big story is to smash the seed bank and remove the ryegrass essentially to very, very low levels, and then it's not a problem any longer. And then glyphosate will still work for a long, long time over a lot of your weeds. Because yes, other weeds can evolve resistance. We've got resistance in a few other species, and particularly in the north, we've got resistance to a number of species. But in the southern farming system, ryegrass is the king. And so I want to just tell you the story of this guy, Chris Reichstein, farmer in Esperance, successful farmer, bought another farm. I'm not sure if that's the photo of the next one. Bought another farm, and then a year after he bought it, found that he'd bought a farm full of glyphosate-resistant ryegrass, right? Damage control, what do we do? So really got stuck into all of the big six we're talking about today, and in particular harvest weed seed control. Started with windrow burning, then moved on to chaff carts, spraying behind the swath, all of the good stuff, plus, you know, rotation, mix and rotate herbicides, competitive crops, the whole gamut. Smashed the ryegrass population so low and got so confident that he can beat glyphosate-resistant ryegrass that he then went and bought another farm which he knew had glyphosate-resistant ryegrass. So it's a pretty gutsy move, but it does just show that we can beat ryegrass by beating the seed bank. So that's enough from me. We've talked about the double knockdown. It's number one of the big six. And we're going to talk about the rest of the big six today. The way this morning's going to run is I'm going to present now, and then Rick Rundle-Gordon is going to present about the mix and rotate herbicides. Then we're going to do about a 20-minute question and answer session around this topic, because the mix and rotate pre-em herbicides is very similar to the double knock message. So double knock, ryegrass, it's the world champion of glyphosate resistance, and the double knock is the best way to stem that tide. And an even better way is to make sure you've got no weeds at all because you've smashed the seed bank. Thank you.